Well, it's good to be with you guys again tonight. So we've got tonight. So tonight, what we're going to be doing is kind of building a little bit off last night. Last night we talked, and some of you weren't here last night, so I'll just kind of talk to you. So Annette and I, my wife and I, serve as full-time missionaries in Los Angeles. We work for an organization called Jews for Jesus. So we're both Jewish, from Jewish backgrounds, believers in Jesus, and our ministry is kind of focused on communicating the message of Jesus to the broader Jewish community. And so last night we talked about contextualizing the message. And the idea is you're sort of communicating in a way that people can understand and contextualizing it to their kind of world. So the easiest way to think about this is like language. So contextualizing the gospel in America means that in many places, not all, we speak English. But if you're in a Spanish-speaking country, it would be Spanish, or so on and so on. But that culture also is a kind of language. And so when we talk about contextualizing, often what that means is we're talking about speaking into a culture that is kind of unique. And so that's we're going to kind of build on that. And tonight talk a little bit about kind of engaging in gospel conversations. And this is not specific to Jewish people or Jewish things. It applies to everybody, including Jewish people and Jewish things. And so what we want to talk about tonight is relational evangelism. So let me just define that a little bit. So when we say relational evangelism, we're not so much talking about like relational versus non-relational. So like I'm throwing rocks at people. That's not the other option. So we're talking about a strategy. So relational evangelism is like talking to people in general that you have a connection with, or at least people that you have the opportunity to have a connection with. So this would be opposed to something like what I would call doctrinal evangelism. And doctrinal evangelism would be something like, go somewhere, preach the gospel, talk about sin, the cross, the need for salvation, give a gospel message, and if people don't respond, move on. That's it. It's the same message wherever you go. And there was a period of time in particularly America and the world where that really, really worked. But less and less that's working in the world, especially the more kind of urban context that we live in. So relational evangelism opposed to doctrinal evangelism, or opposed to what I would call social evangelism, which is like, well, I'm going to preach the gospel, you've heard this saying, and when necessary, use words. Have you ever heard that saying? Yeah, so it's kind of an interesting sort of a way of thinking. Very often social evangelism never uses words, so it never really gets to words. And so when what we're going to talk about tonight is relational evangelism, and really as a way of saying this is kind of a strategy that is probably most likely going to be the strategy that you guys use and engage in the world that you are living with. So, okay, strategies change. The gospel doesn't. Changes in strategies are normative, not something to feel anxious about or to fear. And so what I want to do is just take a moment and talk just briefly about a biblical passage and show you a little bit about what I'm thinking, what I'm kind of talking about. So the book of Acts. So the book of Acts is, in a sense, the book of Luke part 2, right? Written by the same person. And Luke tells a story up about Jesus' life up to the time of his ascension. Luke now takes over, Acts takes over at Jesus' ascension and basically goes to the next series of years that the church is going on, follows Paul's ministry, talks about very varying different things. So here's a quote from a commentary. It says, Luke is writing about salvation history and the fulfillment of God's purposes through preaching rather than political or military means. So this is kind of what Luke is doing through both of these books. Acts is kind of part 2. So during the first several chapters of the book of Acts, up till chapter 16, you read a lot about the preaching of the gospel and that the gospel should be preached. So evangelism comes from this word. So in Greek, the word is evangelion, and it's good news. That's kind of what the word means. And it's almost like evangelism is like good newsing. That's the idea of the word. And so you see various people preaching, the gospel being preached. And in Acts 16, something changes. Because the word evangelism, evangelion, is only used in the book of Acts up until chapter 16. After chapter 16, there's another word used to describe the same basic activity. And that word is reason or dialogue. And so, as Paul was going into communities, sharing with the gospel for the first part of the book of Acts, it was called evangelism. In the second part of the book of Acts, it was called reasoning or dialoguing. It's kind of a bit of the same activity, but it's called two different things. So why the change in language? I think what happens is, as the book of Acts goes on, you see a little bit of the change of strategy. Toward the end of the book of Acts, you have churches that have been established that Paul is returning to. In the first part of the book of Acts, Paul is setting up those churches for the first time. The people are a little bit more kind of established in their faith. What you also see is Paul stays in these places longer. So where he might be in a city for a week, later in the book, he might be in a city for 3 months. And so the strategy starts changing. They spend more time backtracking, ministering to people that they had more of a relationship with. And so, imagine this. Imagine you guys went to the Dominican Republic a couple weeks ago, and you met various people that you were there on the missions trip. So imagine you got to go back and see them again in a couple of months. And the next time you went back, you actually got a little bit more time to spend with them. And maybe you got a chance to go back again. Chances are you would want to spend even more time with them there. You're sharing the gospel in both of these kind of setups, the first time, the second time, the third time, but the way in which you're going about sharing the gospel, it's different. So, in the book of Acts, their ministry, as the book goes on, becomes more relational. And so, as I'm sort of talking to you about a new sort of strategy and kind of evangelism, this sort of more, relational evangelism, for some this might seem, very obvious or very comfortable. But what we're going to do is give you a little bit of some role-playing opportunities to practice some of what we're talking about, and we're going to give you a couple of strategies to work with. Okay? So, you all need to pair up and find a place in the room. You can stay in your seats, you can go over there, you can move around, but I want you to get in pairs. So, go.
I think I'm going to go grab a stool.
Okay.
Standing for a long time cooking today.
Okay. All right.
I know we do. I say that all the time. I can't stop. Everyone's like, why do you say that? Wait, I never heard anyone say that.
All right, so once you find your pairs, find a place, sit down, and go somewhere.
Layman's. What?
Like you guys, find a place somewhere and go somewhere.
Oh, we're on topic.
All right. You can sit down. You're going to be there for a little while. You can sit on the floor if you want. It's fine. Okay.
You sit that way, we'll sit this way. You sit right here.
Okay. So I'm gonna ask you to sort of draw on your experience in the Dominican Republic. And if you're here and you're part of the group of people that are visiting, you haven't been to the Dominican Republic, just pick another thing and you'll understand what I'm talking about. So what you're going to do in your pairs is I want you to introduce somebody that you met in the Dominican Republic to the other person in your pair. If you weren't in the Dominican Republic, you can choose someone, a friend, someone from school, from someone from your world. And so you've got 3 minutes to introduce that person to the other person in your pair. Annette will be the timekeeper.
Okay.
And then we'll switch and go the other way around. Does that make sense? You have questions? Bring the questions on. I love the questions. No, you're not.
No.
You don't have to be that person. You're just introducing that person. No, you would say, "Oh, hey, I
met Joe Schmo, and he is from Arkansas, and he works as a dog handler for movies.
in
and
the
he's-
Dominican Republic."
He's 47, and he lives in the Dominican Republic. and-
Amazing. So, does that make sense? Right. So you're just introducing. Okay.
How many minutes?
You got 3 minutes each.
Each. Okay. Okay.
So, and as you're doing this, so take a minute and think about the person you want to introduce and what you want to say and all of that. Just take a second, and then what I want to do is I want you particularly to be listening to the other person as they're telling you some of this story. Okay? Does that make sense? Any other questions? Good.
Okay.
All right. So, first person, go. So you're going to do this one.
Right. So they have to do.
So they're going to introduce now, and what's going to happen.
Switch.
And then we want you to role play in a conversation where, so if I'm telling you about David, now we're going to have a conversation, and you're David,
Okay.
and I'm me.
Okay. Okay, good. Did we do these exercises last year?
No, because it was on Zoom.
Oh, okay. I didn't remember this. So, where you play the person you just introduced. introduced.
Well, you
Okay.
can change it if
Yeah,
you want,
okay.
I guess, but
That's okay.
I just thought that was kind of a interesting way of doing it.
Well, but you play the person you just introduced means it's not the person who listened to the introduction who's playing that person.
Oh, okay.
So how should you do it?
Do it like that.
Do it like what? As it's written here?
Sure.
Was the point though like to see how well you were listening during the first exercise?
It can go either way. It doesn't. It's not. That was what I had in mind, but I obviously wrote it wrong.
Okay. Well, we can switch it.
Okay, so that's just, is that enough time? Yes. Okay, that was 2 minutes,
Okay.
so now switch, go to the other person. So just give them 2 minutes.
Yeah, okay.
Actually, maybe what you can do is you can do in here is you can say, okay, well, make like, what did you learn about the other person?
For the exercise?
Well, no, I'm adapting.
Okay.
I'm going off script. So I'm just saying, as we now talk about this, we should talk about, okay, well, maybe what are some of the things you learned about the person that was introduced to you? What are some unique things that you learned about them? To kind of get them talking a little bit about that. Does
Giving
that make
us
sense?
that,
Yeah.
letting them talk
Yeah.
to us.
Yeah.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. That's
Okay.
fine.
Okay. So doing some sort of feedback type thing, like now with this one, after this. So.
Okay. Okay, I think we're about done. Okay, let's wrap it up. Okay, thank you. Okay. So we were talking about how obviously evangelism is telling the gospel, is sharing the gospel with people. We might share the scriptures with them. We might ask them leading questions or share our personal testimony with them. But what we're talking about tonight that is so important in evangelism is developing the skill of listening, which is what you guys are starting to do, is paying attention to what the other person's saying. And why do you do that? It's to show that you actually care about this person. You're not just there to deliver the gospel, and shove it down their throat, but to actually, show that you are interacting with them as a person and care about them. And so it helps to build trust when you do that, when you show that you care for somebody. And so it's a skill. It's one that takes practice to learn how to do. You have to slow down and really listen to what they're saying. So I wanted to do a little exercise just where some of you tell us what you learned about the person that was being described to you. What were some of the things? Yeah.
So person's name is Mahalele. It's not her name, but that's what they call her.
Okay.
And she lives in the Dominican Republic. She's an old lady, and she speaks some English, not a lot, surprisingly for her older age. But she never really had a house until some members of the community came together. She was able to have a house, and one of her biggest things that she's thankful for is her house. So because of that, she wants to give back to the community. And so by doing that, she She loves to treat others with putting out ottomans so that they can put their legs up and everything. She gave each person a back massage. She feeds them. Not only that, but when she prays, she prayed in English this one time. And one of the things that Jonah had noted is that she was thankful for every little thing. She would say, "Thank you for the house. Thank you for the roof on this house. Thank you for my neighbors. Thank you for giving, having them over for me. Thank them for each little thing. Just being grateful." It's good.
Yeah. So a really memorable person, it sounds like. I heard a lot of you go, oh, I think you experienced her too, right? Yeah, that's very cool. So what about somebody else? Who's somebody that you just met by the description that your friend told you about this person? Who's somebody? Yeah.
Curtin's friend Brian, he makes water filters. And,
Okay.
Yeah, he does that as a ministry. He moved to the Dominican Republic 2
Yeah.
years ago. He has a wife there. And his wife is the person that made him go on the mission trip that made him want to stay in the Dominican Republic. So, yeah. They have a kid named Owen, who's 11 years old.
Mhm.
They're going to leave at the end of 3 years.
Okay.
So their time's coming to an end pretty soon for now.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
Okay. That's great. Great. Yeah. How about if we do one more? One more. I see a hand way back there. Yeah.
I met Jenna, who is Izzy's sister. She is a sophomore on varsity rowing. She goes to bed at 9 p.m. and she can hardly
And she can do what?
knit with her arms.
With her arms.
Yes.
What is that? Okay. Very good. Okay. So you're learning some. Yeah. That's good. That's good. All right. So this is something, hearing and listening are not the same thing, right? Like when your parents are talking to you and right, and you're like, uh-huh. But have you actually heard, like, if they were to say something that you were really supposed to pay attention to and you didn't get it actually? Yeah, there's lots of examples of that, right? Of actually not really hearing what somebody's saying to you. And so here are a few ideas about some tips about how you can be an active listener so that it's actually sinking in for you what this person's saying to you. Number one, pay attention. And of course, one of the ways the person will know whether you're paying attention is, are you making eye contact with that person? That's a huge one. And even if you can bring yourself to make eye contact, then that will help you to actually pay attention. Number two, withhold judgment. Don't have like in the back of your head, oh, I can answer this with that objection and this with that objection. Just listen, try to understand them, right? And then reflect. What does reflect mean? Reflect means actually say back to them something that they might have said to you, or like rephrase it to like clarify. And actually number 4 is clarify. So maybe they say something to you and then you reflect it back and then you say, is that right? Did you mean by saying that this is what you mean? So try to clarify so you really understand what they're saying. And then number 5, summarize. So maybe summarize, like maybe they told you about, like if you ask them a question, so tell me about what's your religious background like? And they tell you a whole bunch of different things about, maybe I had this experience. And then after they tell you all those, then you could reflect back and summarize and say, so do you feel like your experience then of religion was this? And kind of summarize and see if they go, yeah, I guess that could describe my experience. And then number 6, share. I forget what share was, what that point was about.
Now 6 is now where you can share something after that.
Oh,
after
after
you
you've
share.
really
Yeah, that's the idea.
listen, then you can think about something to share.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're actually speaking to what they're interested in.
So I don't know if you guys have had this experience, but I have to fight this experience all the time. As I'm listening to somebody talk, I think about something that I want to say in response. Like they're still talking, but I want to say something about what they just said. And so I'm just now waiting in the conversation until they're done so that I can say the thing that I want to say. I have to work so hard not to do that. But as soon as I go into that mode, I'm not really listening. I'm just waiting for them to be done. And I'm almost like impatiently waiting for them to be done. So part of that is just kind of getting out of your head and sort of saying, okay, it's not about my conversation here. Let me listen to what this person's saying. Okay.
Have you guys ever experienced that?
Mhm.
Like with somebody else that you're talking to? Have you ever
So
felt
hard.
that? Yeah. So, okay, so we're going to do another exercise. So this time with your partners, we want you to role play a spiritual conversation this time where you play the person that you just introduced. Okay? You play the person that you just introduced, and your partner will just be themselves. So you'll each have 5 minutes this time. Okay? Okay, hold on. We've got a few more instructions here. So as you're talking, try and put yourself into the shoes of the person that you were talking.
Mhm. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay, that you were describing. Try to put yourself in the shoes of the person that you were describing because now you are them, right? Okay? And so this is a lesson in empathy, right? So the person playing themselves should begin, okay? If you don't know what to say, try a question like, what do you believe? Or tell me something of your experience with faith, or what's your understanding of the Bible? Or you could even ask like that question I said, do you know, what kind of was your family religious or not? Something that's got, you know, something like that. Yeah.
Can I,
Mhm.
and I'll just offer, like, if you want to make it more difficult, switch. So you play the person that was just introduced to you.
It's to see if you really were listening.
To see if you were listening. So you can do it either way. We'll let you guys choose. But
But then there's going to be a
yeah.
flip too.
But we're going to go the
and
other
you'll
way
trade.
around.
Right.
So.
We're going to do it 2 times, right? So you guys have 5 minutes, okay? Where's the timer now? Let's see. Timer. Is it there? No. That's the world clock. Timer. Okay, 5 minutes.
Give them
3?
3 each. Yeah.
3 minutes. Okay. I like watching their faces move.
You have really a lot. You also have in this area, you have a lot to say there. So, you know, these are just like starting points. This is just bullet points. This isn't script. And so,
Well, I
you know,
thought about saying here,
yeah.
maybe at the end of this, I'll just tell the story of how I went from being a bad missionary to a better missionary. Can I tell that story before we move on to? Because that's the one
You
about
can,
listening.
is if you don't call yourself a bad missionary. Because you weren't a bad missionary. No. If you can say, I went from being a missionary to being a better missionary. Okay? Oh,
Okay. Yeah, tell that story at the end of the exercise.
good. Yeah, because, I mean, like, honestly, like this part here, that was really you. You're the one that put that in there. You might not remember, but I think it's because something that's you've really. I mean, I wrote that stuff. It was the concept was your idea. Because you really, like, that's been very meaningful to you.
Yeah. They seem to be able. ask you, well, after I switch this, I don't know how to get back to the notes.
The notes are right here.
No, the notes on here.
Oh, I'll get it back for you.
Okay. I have an example
Okay.
in later on there. Okay, guys. Great. The 3 minutes is up. We decided to give you 3 instead of 5.
Switch.
Okay, so now switch.
It's funny how these kinds of things are, they're fun, but they're really like helpful. Like
Yeah.
in preparation to talk to people. Yeah.
That's good. But we did we do this before or after they came to LA? We did it before, right?
With who?
With this group.
Well, we were supposed so remember, we didn't meet with them before they came to LA. When they came to LA, that was the first time that we met them.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah, because when we it was the weather, right?
Right.
Because we came up, we couldn't do it, and then we tried to do it again. That was a problem, and then we ended up doing it after.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, and it was okay. I mean, it was not ideal, just because it was Zoom. You know, Zoom with a group is never like together. So. Back massage. I could go for a back massage.
Yeah. Should we ask them to give us any feedback on
Give us
about
back
the
massages.
experience right now?
Yeah. Well, how are you going to do it? Got a minute and a half to figure it out.
Just ask them. How did the conversation go? Did they feel like they were
How
able
about-
to?
How about we
Yeah.
ask? What's something that was like surprising that you learned, or was there something that you learned when you were playing the person about them? Something, I don't know. Maybe we can have something more than just like, so how'd it go?
Okay. Okay.
Got a minute.
No, that sounds good. I like that question.
Okay.
That ball keeps rolling around in here. Okay, guys, let's finish up. Let's wrap it up.
You want this?
Okay. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thanks, guys, for trying that out. So we'd like for just a few of you to share. So was there something like when you became that person that you were describing, for those of you who decided to do it that way, was there something that was kind of surprising to you about, you know, what you kind of created that this person said, you know, when you were trying to imagine being in their mind, and, you know, something that surprised you about that? Yeah? Yeah. Uh-huh.
So let me tell you a little bit about my person. It's Dr. Fernando from the Dominican. And
Mhm,
And so
mhm.
like, I just found myself something like that too. Yeah.
Yeah, how people, right, people's body language is meant to
Good.
communicate something, right? Or show how they feel about, yeah. Did somebody try and play the person that they were listening about? Did anybody attempt that? And did you do well at it? What do you think?
So,
No.
So I introduced my 5-year-old friend Kai to Sam, and Sam was pretending to be him, and it was really, yeah, like it was so accurate. And just like, I mean, he's a typical 5-year-old, but he's like a missionary kid, and so she was talking as if she was him, and talking about like what he prays for, and yeah, it just was really accurate.
Wait, so it was accurate.
It was accurate.
Uh-huh, that's great. Very good.
No, I didn't do well.
And then April, did you start any kind of like a gospel conversation with the 5-year-old? I forget his name now.
Not really.
No. You were just like, yeah, that could be a little challenging.
It is.
We have to call in Child Evangelism Fellowship for that
Yeah,
one.
yeah.
They're the specialists in that, right? Anybody else want to share about how their conversation went? What they felt like it was meaningful? Yeah.
Me and Kirtland did like the switch thing too.
Okay.
It was
Mhm.
funny because there's a lot of things that I got totally wrong.
Ah.
It was funny. And then when it was her turn to be like my person, my first quick question was just, what's your biggest sin problem? And she didn't know how to answer that, so she did not.
That's a tough question to have sprung
Wow.
on you.
What's your biggest sin problem? That's like right at a boom. Yeah, there you go. That's right. What's your biggest sin now?
Okay, Peyton.
Yeah.
So you talked to a Buddhist? Okay.
He said all is one, and asked a question about that, and he said, well, everything is one, and I'm not,
And, okay.
But he also hit it. He also needed to.
So like one of you guys met a Buddhist or knows a Buddhist? Oh, this from last week?
He just
Yeah.
chose to recommend Buddhist because he, never mind. But yeah, so it was really hard to actually try to have a conversation when they were just, it felt like I was trying to ask questions to a brick wall.
Ah, okay, yeah. And that is going to be a realistic experience sometimes. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's all one. I have one brick wall.
One brick
Yes.
wall.
I think, Haley told me about Mama Layla and how she didn't have much as like donors or you know saying.
Yeah.
But I still think it was so cool how she was willing to offer just about like nothing to everyone and just like a willing heart.
Mhm, mhm.
Reminds me of everybody.
Mhm.
That's all.
That's cool. Yeah, a very
Good.
impactful person. So yeah, so this is, I can't tell you how important active listening is to connecting with people. So when I was a new missionary, you know, newly married, newly trained, New York City. I'm a girl from Fresno, and the only thing I have in common, yeah, go Fresno. Oh, more Fresnons. Yes, you guys all need to come to Joshua Wilderness Institute. we need more Fresnons up here. So anyway, so yeah, so here I am. Here I am in New York City. I'm a Jewish girl. I have that in common with these Jewish women I'm trying to share the gospel with in New York City. But I don't have anything else in common with them. I'm visiting women who are like in their 60s and 70s. I'm visiting Jewish women from Ukraine and from Russia. And I didn't understand them, but I knew what my job was. I had just been trained in apologetics and in, you know, and in Judaism and all the things that I should know to be a missionary. So I would go to their house, would deliver the gospel, I'd pray with them, I'd read some scripture, and I just couldn't understand why I was not connecting with these women very well. I mean, I think some of the things were I think the best visit maybe one of the most successful visits I did one time was Barry Organ. There was a guy named Barry Organ who I wasn't even really ministering to this Jewish guy. My boss was, but my boss had some unexpected thing happen, and he said, "You go do the visit with Barry." So Barry was a business teacher at the college around the corner. So I went to Barry's office to go and talk to him more about Jesus. I walk in, Barry's in there with a couple of guys that have name tags on and white shirts and ties, you know, brother or elder so-and-so and elder so-and-so. Barry had decided to invite a couple of Mormons, and he
forgot about that.
and he wanted to ask us like the same sets of questions, you know, and I had no idea that this was what I was going to be, you know, facing that day. And that day, actually, all of my like apologetics and all that came in quite handy. And Barry, not just because of me, but Barry became a believer within a short time. And I think he saw the Mormons, they didn't have anything on the true gospel, so, and he could see the difference between those. But for the most part, I was not really connecting with these Jewish women, even though I was trying to. I was trying to deliver the gospel to them. Okay, fast forward, years later, okay. Oh no, one more little part of the story, as I'm a young missionary. One evening, I'm doing my calling Monday night, you know, making appointments to go see these ladies later in the week, and I hear my coworker Susie, and Susie was about 10 or 15 years older than me, had been a missionary for longer. I hear Susie on the other side of the office, and she's talking to some woman that she's ministering to. And she's like, "Hey, Barbara, how are you doing? Yeah, how's your recovery going from the surgery? Okay, good. You know, here's something that you can do to speed up the recovery." And then, yeah, and your dog, and who watched the dog while you were having, and I'm thinking to myself, Susie is not being a good missionary. She's not talking about the gospel with this woman. She's asking Barbara how she's doing. And I had no idea that what Susie was doing was actually caring for Barbara and caring about what was happening in Barbara's life, so that Barbara believed that Susie actually cared about her. And I wasn't doing any of that stuff. Fast forward to, you know, 10, 15 years later, after I'd been a mom all those years, you know, because I stopped being a missionary, raised my kids, learned about how to slow down and take care of kids and listen to them, and, you know, and pick them up after they cry and all that kind of stuff. And 10, 15 years later, I come back to being a missionary, and now I'm like a middle-aged woman. And I go and I sit down and I talk to a Jewish woman. And do I, you know, start by, here, this is what you need to know? No, I'm like, so tell me about yourself. You know, where are you from? What kind of, you know, was your family religious? But just all sorts of questions about them, not just ones that are going to lead to a gospel conversation. You know, do you have kids? How long have you been married? All those kinds of questions. And that was such, you know, a way to open the door and so that these women knew that I actually cared about them as human beings. And that's something you need to do. You need to just connect with people that way.
Yeah. And listening is kind of your first strategy. So second, that's your first tool. Second tool, which I think is something that a lot of people ask, which is, how do we know if we're doing it right? How do we know if we've how do we know if we've made, like, it's good or bad or medium or whatever? So there's no sort of like reliable, what sometimes is called like a metric, which is like a way of measuring something. And so it can especially be difficult because what you're trying to measure in a conversation with someone on a spiritual level is almost impossible to measure, because you're measuring something that's not concrete. So if you're at, let's say, you're working at Hume and you're at the pool and there's like a child to teacher ratio that you need to have in the pool so that there's like a safety, that's a very concrete measure, a hard measure. But soft measures would be something like, how do you know that a program is making a difference? How do you know the impact? How do you know if people are satisfied? Those are much harder things to measure. So I want to offer you two suggestions of different measures that I find helpful about evangelism. The first is from a book both of these are people that are friends of mine. And so one is a guy named Doug Schaup. He works for InterVarsity down in Southern California. And he's written this book called 5 Thresholds of Postmodern Conversation.
Conversion.
Conversion? Conversion. Hold on. Conversion. Okay, there we go. All right. So here are his 5 thresholds. And I'll read them slowly, and so you'll sort of see. The first is a person that moves from distrust to trust. A person that moves from complacent to curious. A person that moves from being closed to change to being open to change. A person that moves from meandering to seeking. And finally, a person that crosses the threshold of faith. So this is like a very common thing that he has found on college campuses over many years of doing this. That's been sort of helpful. So if you're talking to someone and you might say, okay, so is the issue that they're moving from distrust to trust, or are they moving from being closed to change to open to change? Gives you a sense of like where the person is, how the conversation's going. Another one is it. Yeah.
Can I wanted to give an example from that.
Okay. Yeah.
So I wanted to give one example from my ministry. And then we'll answer the question in a second. This is a woman that is named Suzanne. And actually, she's somebody who became a believer because a friend of hers led her to the Lord, our office administrator.
Oh, yeah.
And Suzanne became a believer 6 years ago. And then her friend asked me to call Suzanne and said, she needs to be discipled. So I called Suzanne, and Suzanne's like, okay, I'll come over and talk with you. And so we talked for a little while, and I said, would you like to, study the Bible with me and grow and understand more about what it means to, now that you're a follower of Jesus? And she's just like, well, I'm really busy. Maybe we can squeeze it in. I'll give you a call, and of course she never called, right? And she's retired. So it's like, how busy is she really? But in LA, people don't just say, I'm not interested. People are too nice to do that. So they give you some excuse. So over the years, I called Suzanne. And I would call her like every 6 months. And finally, Suzanne said, well, I don't really have the time to get together with you, but maybe I'd like to go and see what a messianic congregation's like, because I hear that's where Jewish people who believe in Jesus go to worship. So I shared that information, and she did. She actually went and started to visit sometimes.
Okay, now that,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Would that be from complacent to curious?
Maybe
Yeah.
she moved a little bit, but she hadn't moved enough to actually want to talk to me. But she did one time. She actually brought a friend to meet me because the friend expressed interest. But then when I asked Suzanne, she still was like, no, I'm too busy. I can't do it, So I kept calling her, and every time I'd call her, I'd just be like, hey, Suzanne, how you doing? What's going on? And we talk about her latest whatever it was, something wrong with her foot, or the renters in her building are not paying or whatever. And I talked to her for 15, 20 minutes. 6 months later, I'd call, same thing. We'd chat 15 minutes. No, I'm too busy to. That went on for 6 years. And then I don't know what happened, but this last year, Suzanne, I was talking to her, and she's like, hey, you know what? I've got a question for you. And I was reading something, in the Bible, and she wanted to get together for coffee, and she wanted me to answer these questions that she had. And then I was starting a Bible study for Jewish women who haven't had any discipleship, and she said, yeah, I want to come to that, but I don't have a computer and I don't know how to use one. Can I come to your house and sit next to you while you do it? So she comes and sits next to me while I do a Zoom call with all the other women. And now she's growing in her faith, But in the middle of that, like, she'll say, I don't know, this is really hard. Is this really worth it? Can't I just be a follower of Jesus? Why do I have to study the Bible?
She likes to complain.
And then I go, Suzanne, trust me, you're going to get a lot out of this. And she's like, okay, let's keep going. Because
Yeah.
like now and then she said to me one day, I don't know why it took me so long to finally be willing to talk to you. And I was like, I know why.
Mhm.
You didn't trust me. It took me 6 years of calling you before you finally. So she's an example of that.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, could you just repeat those 5?
Yeah. So, moving from distrust, I'm going to give you another model that's similar to this. Moving from distrust to trust, moving from complacent to curious, moving from being closed to change to being open to change, moving from meandering to seeking, and crossing the threshold of faith. So here would be an example of how you can use this. Let's say you're talking to someone and you're trying to get them open to the idea of change, but they don't even trust you. You have skipped over a couple of steps that they haven't gone through yet. And so you really have to listen and be aware of where they are and follow where they are in the conversation so that you can move forward. Okay?
And you don't need to give up.
Yeah.
You just have to kind of,
Suzanne.
yeah,
There we go.
be with them where they are and wait for them to, just continue to show them, that faithful kind of involvement.
So the other model is it's a little bit of a simpler way of saying it's an A to Z scale. So A is the most hardened atheist you can imagine. Z is a person that is so committed to God and committed to Jesus, it's just you can't be any more committed. That's the scale, A to Z. So where people are on that scale is helpful to sort of try and think about in the conversation, and that the goal of a conversation in this way is to sort of move people one letter. Not necessarily to move them to a point of making a decision, but move them one letter. So the person who might be at, I don't know, whatever, at one point, you're just moving them a little bit further in a conversation. So the guy that kind of uses this is a guy named Randy Newman. He's a cool guy. So he works for something called the C.S. Lewis Foundation. So he's a big C.S. Lewis guy. Okay, so here's what I want you to do. I want you to take just a minute, and I want you to, in whatever way you want to kind of arrange the A to Z scale. A is hardened atheist, Z is super committed believer, okay? The person that you introduced, I want you to see where you would put them on the scale.
And why?
And why. So take a minute. You have 1 minute to do this for both of those people. It shouldn't take you very long.
Okay, a couple minutes?
No, 1 minute, that'll be fine.
1 minute? Okay. So, do you want me to do part of this?
Well, let's see if we can what happens when they come back and talk. But I think I'll do this because I think it's already 7:40,
Okay.
so we need to wrap it up.
Okay.
So we took a little long in the
Okay.
tool one question.
I think the stories, though, hopefully are helpful.
Yeah, they're not unhelpful. They can be told in a little bit of a condensed version, but yeah. All right, you got it sort of figured? Okay. All right. Okay. So what we're trying to do, we're not trying to like pigeonhole a person in saying, oh well, this is who this person is or anything like that. You're just trying to get a sense of like where someone is at the moment, and so that what we're trying to do is see if we can move people forward in a conversation. So, someone want to share? Maybe someone that hasn't talked before? Where are you? Uh-huh.
So mine is Isabel. She's from She works the physical therapy department, and yeah, she's definitely a Z.
Z. All right. Super committed.
Yeah, she always pointed back to scripture anytime that I was down or just feeling
Good.
overwhelmed by what we were doing, or just tired from the day or whatever. Like, and she always just said, trust in God, trust in God. Even the language barrier, she still preached Christ.
That's great. Good. Excellent. Mm-hmm.
I introduced a kid named Yankee. He's only 4 though, so I was like probably somewhere in the middle because he knows about God.
Okay.
He thinks God's cool, but he just like, he just calls him his friend.
Okay.
Yeah. So he's just someone he plays with.
Okay. So what would you, where would you put him?
That was kind of hard for me because
Yeah.
he's like, he knows about God and he
Yeah.
calls him his friend, but I don't know if he fully understands that, like what that means.
Right.
So it's just like, I
Yeah.
kind of put him towards the middle, but like a little bit behind it
Okay.
just because he doesn't fully know. But he doesn't
Okay.
hate God. So he
Yeah.
knows.
Good. So like 4, it's hard because you're 4, right? And so, but as you're sort of working with a person, if you had more of a long-term relationship, ideally you would sort of see them grow in sort of down the line a bit. Okay, maybe one more.
Yeah.
I introduced a guy named Josue. I worked with him in media.
Josue?
Josue.
Joshua.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, he's really cool. And I said he's probably around like XYZ. He's very committed.
Okay.
And there's a lot of conversations that I had where kind of like, always turn back to something spiritual.
Yeah.
He always prayed all the time. So I always say something around that.
Right, right. So if you've ever had this experience, which I'm sure you will be having, if you haven't already during this year, you'll have it more. You have a conversation and then you sort of in your mind, you're thinking through like, oh, well, how do I like gauge that conversation? How's that person doing? These are a little bit of a strategy to help you have some tools to do that. So can I go on to the third?
Yeah.
Okay. So the third tool is now, how would you move a conversation forward? And my suggestion to you is that you move a conversation forward through asking questions, not explaining theological terms. Asking questions is probably your best strategy for moving a conversation forward. So the guy, Randy Newman, who's a good friend, he has one of my favorite quotes about evangelism. And this is what he writes. Frustration might be the most common emotion that Christians associate with evangelism, followed closely by guilt, confusion, and despair. So, yeah, there you go. I don't know. Strangest sense of humor. This is Jewish joke land, if you were wondering. You got that? All right, good. Okay, good. Okay, so asking questions. Asking questions provides a framework for moving people forward. And here's one of the things that's really helpful. Asking questions, you do not need to be an expert to ask good questions. You do not need to be a theologian to ask good questions. Questions tend to awaken interest. They don't sort of shut things down. Questions usually lead to other questions. And so there's 3 types of questions that I usually try and think about. One is clarifying questions, like what makes you think that? How did you come to that idea? What do you mean? A deepening question, which is like, well, how does that work? Or what does that change, like how does that change you or the world around you? Or, Is that something that you've believed for a long time? And then the third would be like invitation questions, which is, would you be interested in hearing my story? I don't assume that people want to hear my story. So would you be interested in hearing my story? Or would you be willing to hear something from the Bible on that subject? Or would you be willing to come to a service? That might be part of the case. But going from listening to like evaluating and then asking questions, to be honest with you, in relational evangelism, that's going to be a really good strategy that works well. It's not necessarily going to be fast, but it will really work, at least from what we've seen over our years of doing this. It's quite effective in terms of how you move forward in a conversation evangelistically. So,
Yeah, it's interesting when people start to answer the questions, they're thinking about what they're saying.
yeah.
And sometimes they're thinking, why do I believe that? Or
Yeah.
that does, or I don't have the answer to your question, and maybe I should have an answer to that question.
Yeah.
So,
So that's what we've got tonight. That's we're done with our thing. So I just wanted to see if there were any, because we kind of went for a little bit longer than I was expecting, but we see if there was any questions that you guys had or any follow-up stuff or stuff to think about. We can come back to that. Mm-hmm.
What if you're like limited on time, like at a grocery store, or just like situations like very accurate?
Yeah, so here's what I found. And you're almost always limited on time, right? But a question, a well-asked question, can sort of linger with a person, I think, in my experience, better than like a really well-crafted statement. Because a question makes people think about what's going on inside of them rather than something that you said to them that might be like brilliant or something. But
and trust too that you may be just one person in a long line of people, that they'll interact with. And each one is like, it's like a bucket, and each one is a drop in the bucket until that bucket's finally full,
Right.
So you don't have to be the one that does everything perfectly to get that person over the threshold. Yeah.
So when we're down at UCLA and we're out on the campus, we use this survey strategy. And part of the reason why I think it works well is because it's just questions. Yeah.
How do you guys deal with rejection talking about this?
Yeah. Well, rejection's always hard, right? Like, who likes rejection? But I think if the way I measure evangelism is my ability to communicate to somebody a truth that's even hard for me to understand, let alone them, if that's the measure of success, then it's really easy for me to feel like a failure. But if what I'm doing is listening and asking questions and trying to help these people connect with God, then actually they're the ones that are really doing the work, not me. So though rejection is hard, there's not that sense that I have failed, which is very often how you feel, So, all right. Okay, well, we should probably close in prayer. Yeah? Okay. Also, Annette made cookies in our room. So there's cookies in our room, and the door's open. That means you're all invited. So, okay. Actually, Tanner, should I pray, or you want to pray, or? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
It wasn't just me. It was.
Oh yeah.
Right. Also, yes.
That's right.
Emily and.
Uh-huh.
I always could say it wrong.
And
Brinley.
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 Brinley. Brinley, yeah.
Brinley.
Okay. So, so let me pray, and then we'll close. Lord, thank you so much for, well, I guess I should say, first of all, thank you for the salvation that you've brought to our lives. And amazingly, you have chosen to use us in the mission that you have in this world. And God, thank you for your love. Thank you for caring for us, enabling us. And Lord, we just pray that as we engage to the world around us, that you would speak through us. Lord, help us to listen well to the world around us. Help us to understand who we are in you. And God, help us to ask good questions. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right.
Hey, give
Thank
a
you,
hand
guys.
for